Welcome, everybody, back to After Hours, OANN's long-form interview show where Washington newsmakers take off their ties, go beyond the sound bites, relax, and tell you their stories. I'm John Hines, OANN's D.C. bureau chief, congressional correspondent, and for better or worse, your Sherpa on this journey. Well, if you want to understand who the men were who tried to assassinate the president, President Trump, what they were doing in the hours leading up to their attempts, how close they came to changing American history tragically, and why so many questions still remain nearly 2 years later, then we have the guy for you. Ken Silva is the managing editor of Headline USA and author of The Trump Assassination Plots, What the Investigation Missed and Why It Matters. In the book, Silva conducts a deep dive into the failed assassination attempts using congressional testimony, hearing records, law enforcement timelines, and government documents to reconstruct what happened moment by moment. Silva also examines the backgrounds of the suspects, the security failures surrounding the attempts, and what he calls a troubling lack of transparency from federal authorities. Ken, let's start at the beginning. What made you decide to take on this story and write a book about the assassination attempts against President Trump? And I use the word attempts here because you get into details about several, and I think people forget that there have been several. Why start there?
First of all, thanks for the kind words. And, we were talking right before we went on air that I spent the majority of my career doing local news down in the Caribbean and elsewhere. I had this idea that I was going to, cultivate a resume and maybe one day work for a so-called respectable job, Wall Street Journal.
Go ahead, make everybody jealous and tell them you worked in the British Virgin Islands and the Cayman Islands. Just get that out there.
Yeah, that's right. That's where I got my start, which is, a great place for a reporter to kind of cut his teeth because it's a local place, 30 to 50,000 people, but also it's practically its own country. They're tied to the UK, but they've got their own parliament, their own police force, national security. So you're covering the big stuff right away, just on a smaller scale. But the reason I bring that up is because I didn't get into national media back in the U.S. until late 2021. I decided, jump in the pool. At a lot of things happening with COVID and other issues were upsetting to me. I decided to,
But from the very beginning, you sank your teeth into this. And what's also interesting is you're actually based in Charlotte, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And you managed to write this book and to report on assassination attempts, and plural is the word. Why sink your teeth into this? Why not, something else?
Well, I guess, like I said, I didn't start in this media ecosystem until late 2021. So I had missed Russiagate, COVID, January 6th, all like the stories that came to define the next 4 or 5 years of the political landscape. And so I was kind of playing catch up with a lot of the competition. And so when Trump was grazed in the ear with a bullet in July 2024, I immediately thought,
Butler,
Pennsylvania. I immediately thought, this is the story I just want to latch on to like a pit bull, try to beat the competition. And surprisingly, there hasn't been much competition. There's been kind of a lack of interest from a lot of media outlets.
Well, the story is just kind of fallen off the front pages.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I've just stuck to it and tried to flesh it out to the maximum extent possible. And I'm hoping that the book proves that I was able to do that.
Well, I mean, we might as well start with Butler. That's the most prominent assassination attempt of the president, and it's interesting. There's a chapter in here that begins with the headline, or the chapter is entitled, not exactly cover up, and I'm trying to find it right now. And I always do this with these books when I do book interviews. I start thumbing through here, and I supposedly, yellow lined this, outlined it, and put markers on it. But you get into asking several questions about what happened, and you suggest You suggest the cover-up continues. The title of the chapter is "The Cover-Up Continues." And you say in here that there are many, many unanswered questions, and that in fact there was a cover-up.
Yeah, and that's not a theory. We know that for a fact.
This is of Butler.
This is a Butler, and to a large extent, the one that happened 2 months later with Ryan Ruth hiding in the bushes near Trump's Palm Beach golf course. But especially with Butler, we hardly know anything about the alleged would-be assassin Thomas Crooks. And FBI Director Kash Patel and former Deputy Director Dan Bongino will tell you we've disclosed just about everything there is to know. But thanks to the litigation from the transparency group Judicial Watch, we know that's not the case at all. When it became apparent last July that the FBI wasn't going to voluntarily just dump all the records out for everybody to see them, Judicial Watch filed a lawsuit, and they just came back with a status report in January showing that there were 45,000 pages that have been unreleased about Thomas Crooks. A couple of months later, the FBI came back again and said, we found 30,000 more. There's now 75,000 unreleased pages. And in response to the Judicial Watch lawsuit, they've been starting to trickling them out at a couple dozen a month. But, so far we've gotten about 160 pages over a 4-month period. At that rate, it's going to take over a century before they get all 75,000 pages out, and we'll be long gone.
So you ask a lot of questions here. In the wake of the congressional and internal probes, questions still abound. What was the Trump campaign's involvement in preventing farm equipment or large trucks from blocking the line of sight between Trump and the AGR building? Why was Burr, Secret Service agent, the head of communications post, so silent on the radios? This is the lack of communication issue. Why did Secret Service counter-sniper David King wait 15 seconds before returning fire? Who was the mystery ATF agent there that day? Also, who was Thomas Crooks interacting with online? How did he learn how to make ANFO bombs? Why did the medical examiner apparently decline to test his hair samples and bile for drugs? And why was his body released for cremation with bullet fragments still inside it? Did he have any accomplices? Who owned the van that was searched by a bomb squad near the Butler Farm Show the night of the shooting? And where is Maxwell Urich? Maybe that's a good place to start. Who was Thomas Crooks? And I mean, reading your book, he was virtually a straight-A student.
Yeah, that's right. There's
very smart.
The title of the Crooks chapter is The Aberration of Thomas Crooks, because there seems to have been almost like he was living a double life. By all public accounts, he's almost the kid that you'd want your son to turn out with, like very polite young man, scored like a 1520 out of 1600 on the SATs, went to community college for engineering, graduated with a perfect score, was going to go to Robert Morris University in the fall of 2024. He even, at one point for a class project, printed out a chessboard and a Rubik's Cube inscribed with Braille because his mother was legally blind. And so it seems like he was really close to his mother. Just kind of really seemed like a sweet kid on the surface. But we do have information suggesting that he had a darker online persona.
When we come back, who was Thomas Matthew Crooks, and how could online chat rooms have possibly radicalized him? You won't want to miss it. welcome back to After Hours. We are talking to Ken Silva. He is the author of The Trump Assassination Plots, a book, and that's plots, plural, about the assassination attempts on our current president, President Trump. And you were talking a little bit about Thomas Crooks. Who was he and his background?
Yeah, I mentioned that, publicly he seemed like a really good guy, somebody, upstanding in the community, a future engineer. But he did have a darker online persona, and we know this thanks to a mini documentary that Tucker Carlson's team put out about 8 months ago now, where they obtained a trove of social media comments and other data from when he was about 16, around the 2019-2020 era. And he's openly discussing committing acts of violence and terrorism in YouTube comments. At one point, he's saying we should actually assassinate politicians. And he was actually also talking to a known neo-Nazi, some guy that lives in Europe. We were able to confirm his identity. He's part of some group that the State Department has designated as a terrorist organization. I think there's two significant elements to this. For one, it shows that, to me, I think Crooks was probably had to have been flagged by law enforcement in some capacity. Like, you don't get to comment on YouTube about assassinating politicians and not have at least some computer system flag you to probably the FBI. But the other element is it really gives an insight to the type of profile Crooks might have fit, and that's these kids who hang out in kind of online extremism chat rooms discussing violence. We're seeing increasingly that school shooters and mass shooters kind of come from this murky, like I said, online extremism chat rooms.
They spend a lot of time online.
Yeah.
And talking to other people maybe who have similar interests, I suppose.
Yeah.
That seems to be the common denominator, right?
That's right. Yeah. When I say extremism, I'm not talking about like the SPLC's definition of extremism. I'm talking about chat rooms specifically devoted to discussing school shootings, mass shootings, other acts of terrorists.
Was Thomas Crook on those sorts of chat rooms? Was he in those sorts of chat rooms?
We don't know for sure, but given his YouTube comments where he's openly discussing these things, I would say it's pretty reasonable to
And this is what you're talking about by secrecy, is that the FBI, other agencies have not allowed you or even investigators, Senate, congressional investigators, to get into that kind of information? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, not even the congressional task force that investigated Butler. Their final reports were mostly focused on the Secret Service security failures, which were, I'm sure we'll get into those. Those were egregious enough, but they were totally stonewalled by the FBI on Crooks's possible motive, who he was communicating with online, these type of things.
We know he was very smart, very intelligent, spent a lot of time on his computer online. Initially, according to what you say in your book, he was a supporter of the president. He was tended to be conservative. Conversations with people, they say he was kind of slightly apolitical, but a little bit conservative in his conversations and his opinions. Do we have a sense of when and why he might have flipped on that and gone the other direction? Also, you make the point in here in your book that he was looking for information about, I guess, travel by both Joe Biden and Donald Trump. He was checking into their schedules and things like that. Do we know maybe why he flipped and went the other direction? Is there any indication?
We don't know why. The social media comments released by Tucker, again, were 4 years old, but they showed in 2019 he was ardent, seemed like a hardcore right-winger, talking about deporting Ilhan Omar, things like that. And then after COVID started, he almost flipped, where he's talking about how Trump's a dummy who's mishandling this. He has comments supporting of quarantines and mail-in voting. All the while, the violent rhetoric is continuing, though. He was a registered Republican, However, he made donations to the left-wing political action committee, Act Blue. So I think the theory there, he actually made a donation on Joe Biden's inauguration day. And I think the theory there is he might have been a registered Republican to vote for like the weaker candidate in the Pennsylvania primaries or something like that.
A strategic voter, perhaps, something like that.
Yeah. Like I said, he wasn't a dummy. He was a pretty smart kid.
So the other interesting thing you mentioned in your book is that he tried out for some pistol and gun club, which I think was associated with his high school, something like that, and they wouldn't accept him because he was a dangerously bad shot, I think is what you said in your book, right?
That was an allegation put forward by one of his Bethel Park High School classmates. However, the school actually issued a statement denying it. The rifle club teacher or coach said, I don't remember Thomas. This doesn't sound right to me. There's also rumors put out by a former classmate that he threatened a school shooting at the time. The school denied that too. And actually, I look back and somebody who went to Bethel Park High School at the same time Thomas did get arrested for threatening a school shooting. So maybe Thomas was his friend, but that wasn't Thomas.
So Thomas Crooks, decided apparently he wanted to get good with a gun, and so he joined the pistol club or the rifle club that was there, and he would go and he would practice kind of like a maniac. He was there on, I think he said he was there on Christmas Day, on Halloween.
Yeah, Valentine's Day, a lot of the holidays, and this is the last year of his life. Starting August 2023, he joins Clariton Sports Club, which is also a facility where the DHS and other law enforcement trains at. I don't know the significance of that, but a lot
professional level, presumably, perhaps.
Sure. And he went there over 50 times in that span, which is more than once a week. The most interesting thing about that is looking through the records released by Senator Chuck Grassley, he got Crooks' sign-in records, and there are 4 times where he's signing in at the exact same time as somebody else and going to the same range as this person. That person's name is redacted. But this is one of the reasons why Congress and other people have called for the FBI to release surveillance footage of the shooting range to see who Crooks was training with.
Which they have not done. So they've kept footage under wraps, information presumably. But from that information, we know that Thomas Crooks apparently was very intentional, was presumably planning or preparing himself for something, right?
Yeah, and also it's worth noting that he was a pretty good shooter. A lot of people said, he missed the shot from only 150 yards away, but that was actually a high adrenaline situation where he was being chased by the cops. One of the cops almost climbed up on the roof seconds before the shooting. And, under a high stress situation, you could see why he just missed. But yeah, he had been training for weeks. And at one point, somebody who went to another gun club with him said that he was pretty deadly with like a 9mm handgun. He shot one target so many times that he blew out a giant hole in the target. He was actually pretty accurate and a serious guy.
So a serious guy, and sounds like a guy who felt like he had maybe a mission, huh?
The strangest thing, though, is that I obtained his community college emails, and in June 14th, 2024, he's emailing his community college asking about his status of his physical diploma because he needed that to go to Robert Morris in the fall, which would have been just a couple months later. So less than a month before he turns up dead on a rooftop, he's still making preparations to go to school. So again, that's why the chapter on him is called The Aberration of Thomas Crooks. It's really, I don't know what to make of it.
It's strange because there's a lot of conflicting actions by him, and it's hard to, sort of take away a pattern, I suppose, and that's what people are looking for here is a pattern. And he has contradicting behaviors, and so it's difficult. On the one hand, he's an A student. On the other hand, he's preparing for something which seems very nefarious. And then you make these comments that he was also apparently planning on going to college. You've been at community college, going to a four-year college, I guess, right?
That's exactly right. And I think it's this double life coupled with the lack of transparency by the federal government that has so many people speculating about, was he a patsy or was something darker going on? I don't have any information about that would suggest that for sure, but it does make me wonder too.
Coming up after the break, find out what the timeline was of the Butler assassination attempt on President Trump's life. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, everybody, to After Hours. We are talking with the author of a new book, Ken Silva. He is a journalist, and he is based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he wrote a book called The Trump Assassination Plots, plots with an S, what the investigation missed and why it matters. So, Ken, let's talk about Butler and that day at the farm. What is it called? The Farm Exposition area?
The Butler Farm Show, yeah.
The Butler Farm Show, which reminds me, one comment when they were planning this, and you talk about this in your book again, why did the Trump campaign want to have an event like this at the Butler Farm Show? The congressman, which is Mike Kelly, this district is it's kind of Erie, Pennsylvania, so it's far western Pennsylvania, stretches down from Lake Erie to include what territory there in western Pennsylvania?
It's about 45 minutes west of Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
So Yeah, Selena Zito, a Washington Examiner reporter, did write a book on Butler that's less of a forensic investigation, more about the community because she's from that area.
Right.
She talks about how it's, former industrial town, down on its luck, and really took to Trump for those reasons because, Trump talks about bringing industry
So
back.
Mike Kelly, the congressman, made a comment. He said, you don't want to do a rally there. Why would he say that?
Yeah, in 2020, Trump apparently held his Butler campaign rally at the airport, which is a lot more secure, a lot more easily securable. And Butler Farm Show is a wide open parcel of land where there's buildings, line of sight issues everywhere. Apparently, they were having a car show closer to the airport. So the campaign just decided, we're expecting up to 15,000 people. We need a big area. But it did set off alarms with Mike Kelly, the local sheriff, and others. Were kind of predicting disaster from the very start.
So the Butler Farm Show is the designated location. What happens then?
Well, there was about a week of planning that went into it, and the planning itself left a lot to be wanted. First of all, people see the aftermath of the shooting and see the women that were kind of fumbling to put their pistols in the holster. Well, those were the planners, and specifically one lady didn't have any experience in planning giant outdoor rallies. It was her turn in the rotation. So, I guess they did the best they could, but obviously, they left multiple lines of sight, including, a rooftop 150 yards away. So basically, the planning was pretty shoddy.
And this is from the beginning. This was a difficult site because you have those buildings, because you have the roof lines. But at the same time, it seems like common sense would dictate that you would have people who would have a view of the roofs. There was apparently a drone, but did that get up in time, or was that useful, or how come that didn't really help spot people?
Yeah, well, I guess this is a good time to bust out the visual that I prepared for this show. So you asked about it was actually drone detection equipment that had been malfunctioning all morning the day of, which is just another, I guess, an unfortunate event.
I can raise that up just
raise that up? Okay.
Little bit there.
So,
okay.
But when we're talking about the planning, so Trump is here. This is the spot eventually used by Thomas Crooks to shoot at Trump. And you're wondering, first of all, they have local snipers in the second-story building in the same complex that was used by Crooks. However, they would have had to stick their head out the window to see this rooftop. Their area, they were more looking for suspicious people in the rally or to the west. Now, the rooftop responsibility...
So Trump is here.
Trump is here.
Okay.
And he's got two set of actual Secret Service snipers right behind him. But their areas of coverage, what the guy who planned this was actually suspended for doing such a bad job, because this team on the north was supposed to cover the AGR building, but you see there's trees right in the way of their line of view to Thomas Crooks. Now, this southern team had a view of Crooks, and this was actually the team that put the final bullet through Crooks, but their area of coverage was to the south. So really, it should have been a cross-coverage situation where this southern barn is looking at the AGR, and this northern barn is covering the south area. And when the team leader was asked about this, initially he said he didn't realize the trees were obstructing the view, but then he later said that, well, I wasn't worried about the trees because we had this team. But of course, again, this team was looking southward for the majority of the event. And the team leader was suspended for, I think, like 45 days or so because of this shoddy plan. But this...
Now, here we have, it says local snipers on this building, which apparently was very close with Mr. Crooks, who was on this building here. Why didn't they happen to see him, or did they, or what do we know about them?
So those guys initially spotted Crooks over an hour before the shooting, kind of lingering around in this
He wasn't on the
area.
roof at that time.
No, this is when they spot him with a rangefinder, and they notify the locals, and the locals started searching for Crooks, and that's a whole debacle in itself. But you asked why they couldn't see Crooks, and if they would have looked out the window, like actually gotten really close to the window, they probably could have. But this goes into another issue of communications. The Secret Service Command Center and the local command center were separate, totally separate areas, so they weren't coordinating with each other. And the local command center leader finds out at 6:08 p.m., the shooting's at 6:11, so he finds out 3 minutes before the shooting that there's somebody on the rooftop, and he puts that over Channel 3, which was the traffic cops up here, the sheriffs, and some of the other locals, but these guys in here were on Channel 4. So if he just would have flipped over to Channel 4 and told his local snipers that there's somebody on the roof, presumably they also would have looked out the window and saw him. But instead, he calls the Secret Service Command Center on his cell phone and tells a Pennsylvania State Police trooper that there's somebody on the rooftop. The trooper says that he relayed that information to the Secret Service Command Center leader, but the Command Center leader says nobody ever told him anybody was on the rooftop. So there's conflicting accounts of what happened between the local, states, and feds. But in any event, so the local Command Center leader says he finally switches over to Channel 4 about 15 seconds before the shooting started and deploys a quick reaction force to respond to the shooter. And finally, the local snipers hear it. But one of the snipers says that by the time he stuck his head out the window, that's when Crooks had already had his head blown off. Mm-hmm. So
by this other sniper, presumably, right?
Well, so this is actually the biggest scandal of all. We discuss a lot of anomalies with Crooks and the other unfortunate security failures that you might wonder, something darker going on, but it's really speculation. But this, any way you slice it, this is a huge scandal that not even Trump acknowledges.
What is the scandal exactly?
So after the White House Correspondents' dinner attack, he actually talked about this. He said, well, at least people tonight did a lot better job than they did at Butler. However, my life was saved in Butler by this sniper. And Trump said he shot within 4.2 seconds, he responded to Crooks's shooting. But that's not the case at all. It was actually Crooks got off 8 shots in 5 seconds, 3 aim shots, the first one grazing Trump's ear, 5 rapid fire shots, and then it was a local cop right around here who shoots at Crooks from the ground. And after that, the shooting stopped for a whole nother 10 seconds before this sniper finally put the final bullet into Crooks.
And this cop, the local cop who shot from here, actually got the barrel of his rifle, right?
That's right, yeah. We think he shattered Crooks's buttstock and possibly also grazed Crooks's kind of ear, ironically. But we know he hit something because the shooting stopped. Crooks stopped firing. And then it wasn't until 10 seconds later that the Secret Service sniper put the final bullet into Crooks. But so if you count it out, that means the Secret Service sniper waited 15 whole seconds before returning fire and then 10 seconds before the shooting had stopped. So
that's a long time.
Yeah, if we stop talking for 15 seconds, I think, that's a lot of dead air. That would get kind of awkward. Moreover, that sniper, even though they were initially covering south, they had turned around and were looking at the AGR building, and he was looking through his scope a good 7 seconds before the shooting fired. So, I might be able to give him the benefit of the doubt and said, hey, he panicked, he messed up. It's unfortunate, but these things happen even to the most well-trained professionals. However, his congressional testimony is very troubling. He initially told the House task force.
This is who we're talking about now?
This is the Secret Service sniper who put that final bullet into Crooks.
Gotcha.
Who Trump hails as, his hero.
Right.
He initially tells the House that I didn't see Crooks until the shooting had stopped. And then he testifies to, similar thing to the Senate Homeland Security Committee. But then a staffer, this is kind of like a Perry Mason moment, the staffer pulled out the sniper's own notes that he had written right after the incident. And he said, well, sir, you say in your own notes that you saw him crawling into position. And so, you just told us that you didn't see him until the shooting had stopped, but that contradicts with your notes. He insisted that his notes are inaccurate, that he didn't see Crooks until the firing had stopped. But I think reason would dictate that the notes are probably more accurate. What you write down right after the incident is more accurate than what you tell Congress a couple months later. So, I'm not necessarily suggesting that this is like a dark conspiracy, but he's clearly trying to cover his own behind because it's a massive failure. So even if it wasn't a purposeful stand down order like some people speculate about, he's being hailed as a national hero for saving Trump, but really he actually dropped the ball.
When we return, how a local cop was the first person to see and shoot Crooks. Find out more when we return. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back, everybody, to After Hours. We are talking to Ken Silva. Ken Silva is the author of a new book called The Trump Assassination Plots. and that's plots with an S, plural. And right now we're talking about the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, at the farm show, the Butler Farm Show, talking about one of the snipers. It's interesting. You mentioned that there were mistakes by the snipers. You mentioned this one sniper who took a very long time to get off the final shot that I guess killed Thomas Crooks, who was on that roof of that other building, making the point that a local from the ground had fired up and apparently hit the barrel of his gun, which caused a delay of about 10 seconds. What else do we know about the events that day, which raise questions? They were looking for a guy who was, and they had a picture. Somebody took a picture of Thomas Crooks, which they circulated somewhere. And they were looking for him for a long time. They couldn't find him. Presumably he was already on the roof and nobody looked on the roof. Is that kind of the conclusion?
Well, the first supposed sighting of Crooks was at 4:26 p.m. that day, almost 2 hours before the shooting. And yeah, if you don't mind, I guess this will be useful again. So the snipers up here, one of them leaves to go home and says that he sees Crooks hanging out by a parking bench, and he texts the two people left in here and says that this guy looks suspicious, watch out. And after the incident, this was later widely reporting that that was the first sighting of Crooks. But in fact, Crooks was down here at the time. This later came out in cell phone footage that he's walking around near the vendors. And so that's just like a weird anomaly. Like, who did they actually see that they thought was suspicious? It was a false Crooks sighting, one of multiple false Crooks sighting that day. But in any event, the first confirmed sighting of him was around 5:20. Again, he's in this area with a range finder. The locals eventually radio the command center. They put that out to all the locals who start looking for Crooks. But the feds are displaying a disturbing lack of curiosity. At one point, a Secret Service sniper response agent, which is kind of like the eyes and ears on the ground for the actual snipers, he goes up to near the fence line, but another Secret Service agent turns him back and says, hey, no, we're looking for him up here. You should look for him down here. And then a key mistake comes at 6:02 p.m., right as Trump is taking the stage. These guys again see Crooks. And this time, Crooks apparently knows that he was spotted, and he runs away and into this alcove right here, right here, where there's an air conditioning unit. And the snipers make a very bad mistake saying that they think he ran all the way around the building. So law enforcement is searching for Crooks up here when, in fact, he had climbed this air conditioning unit, and presumably he was assembling his rifle. And, this is like 10 minutes before the shooting. And finally, he is spotted on the roof, but I think it was a key delay where they say, oh, he's going all the way around, when in fact, he was on top of the roof.
And he was spotted on the roof. Was this the time when the local police climbed up on the roof?
Yeah, he was spotted on the roof just before 6:08 p.m. And there was actually a local cop at a nearby police station, the Butler Township Police Barracks. And he hears all this chatter, and I guess he's a relatively younger, fitter guy. So he's like, let me go help my fellow traffic cops and, try to get this guy. So he drives straight to the AGR building. He climbs up and peeks his head over and sees Crooks with his rifle. Crooks swings his rifle towards the cop. The cop drops down, says he's got a gun, guy on the roof with a gun. And now we're at about 25 seconds before the shooting. This is when the local command center leader finally puts it out over all the radios. Somebody's on the roof with a gun, deploys the heroic local cop named Aaron Zalaponi, who eventually stops him. But, just about like 10 seconds too late, unfortunately.
There's been speculation that perhaps Thomas Crooks didn't act alone. What do we know about that?
And that it is speculation, but I would add myself to the speculative voices with that.
Why?
First of all, there's the fact that he built ANFO bombs.
What is an ANFO bomb?
That's a known ammonium nitrate fuel oil. It's the same type of bomb that Timothy McVeigh used in the Oklahoma City bombing. Basically, it's like fertilizer and fuel. You mix it up properly. It's obviously not that simplistic.
A homemade bomb.
But yeah, I would imagine that he was in touch with somebody online who may have been encouraging him or teaching him somehow to build something that's relatively complex. I mean, he was, I guess, a really smart kid. Maybe he could have been doing it by himself, but I do think he had to have been in touch with people online, because that fits the profile of other mass shooters and school shooters. Usually they're in these chat groups. But as far as the day of, first of all, like I said, we've got multiple false Crooks sightings of supposed suspicious people who turned out not to be him. Second of all, law enforcement did search a van that didn't belong to Crooks, which is one of the big unanswered questions that I have. Basically, after everything stops, they're going through Crooks's person, and they find a remote detonator, and they evacuate the top of the roof and start searching for possible bombs he may have placed because of this detonator. And they search a van that was maybe almost a half-mile away, that the bomb squad does. And we haven't gotten any answers on why they searched that van, why they thought it was suspicious in the first place. They didn't search Crooks's actual car until after midnight, when they responded to the house. They found bomb-making materials in Crooks's bedroom, and then they decided to search his car, and they found more IEDs in Crooks's trunk. But the timeline's bizarre, where, like, why did they view the van as suspicious before Crooks's actual car?
Still to come, what was unusual about the autopsy of the Butler shooter, Thomas Matthew Crooks? Stay with us. Welcome back to After Hours, everybody. We are talking with Ken Silva. He is an author. He's a journalist. He's written a book called The Trump Assassination Plots. What was there are other questions about the autopsy. What are maybe the weird things about the autopsy of Thomas Crooks?
The autopsy, well, first of all, they took the body not to the Butler County coroner, but to the Allegheny County medical examiner.
Allegheny County is Pittsburgh, basically.
That's where Pittsburgh is. And the reason was ostensibly they have more advanced facilities.
How long a drive is that, for instance?
It's a good 45-minute drive.
So a long drive.
Yeah, so he probably didn't get there until 7:30 a.m. Too.
Was there a reason that they went to Pittsburgh instead of to Butler for an autopsy?
Well, the Butler County coroner said they took the murdered firefighter's body to Allegheny County to avoid media attention. Apparently there were media trucks by the Butler facilities. But then with Crooks, they said they took him there because they have more advanced facilities, even though they wound up doing just kind of a basic autopsy and toxicology. So we've got conflicting reasons.
And so what questions remain in your mind about the autopsy of Thomas Crooks?
Well, first of all, the autopsy, which I've been on your show to talk about this before, it was challenging to get because I requested it from Allegheny County, and they said, well, even though we did the autopsy and the toxicology, it's not our jurisdiction, so we're not going to give it to you. I asked Butler for it. They said, well, we don't have it right now. It was a big, long legal battle to finally get the reports. I get the toxicology report, which is especially interesting because it lists 8 specimens that were collected from Crooks. They collected a couple vials of blood, some eye fluid, bile. They collected some hair. And these items are listed 1 through 8 as having been collected. But then when you look at the results, not all the specimens are listed. It's like number 1, 2, 4, 5, 7. There's 3 items that the results aren't listed for: a vial of blood, bile, and the hair. So either the medical examiner didn't test these specimens, or he tested them but didn't include them in the report for some reason, which is just another bizarre.
So omitted information.
Yep.
Apparently. We don't know. We have no idea why. Did anybody explain that to you?
I've talked to medical examiners who said that these specimens could have yielded testing positive for psychotropic drugs or otherwise, especially hair. That'll hold, the drugs will show up in the hair for a lot longer than it would in your blood, especially if he's up on a rooftop for 12 hours. So again, total speculation, but maybe he was on some sort of weird prescription drug and they're hiding it for political reasons or other. I don't know. It's bizarre.
And so we talked about Butler for a little bit, but there was another attempted assassination. It was the president, the former president at that time. He hadn't been elected yet, of course. This is during the campaign in Florida, his golf club. And there was a guy named Thomas Ruth. And what happened and why? Well, first of all, the president is sort of erratic in terms of his golf schedule. How did Thomas Ruth happen to be Ryan? Excuse me.
You're Ryan Ruth. That's all right.
Did I say Thomas? How is it that Ryan Ruth? So we have a situation where the former president, who was, I guess, in a campaign at that point, he goes to his golf course, and there's this guy. His name is Ryan Ruth, and he was apparently waiting for the president. But the question is, how did Ryan Ruth know the president would be there? Because I gather the president, at that time the former president, hadn't been elected yet, reelected, was a little bit erratic with his golf schedule. As a matter of fact, you make the point in your book that he actually, I think, moved up his tee time at the last minute and decided to go earlier than he was planning beforehand, yet Ryan Ruth was there.
Yeah, and that's the $1 million question as far as this incident goes, which People should recall that this was only 2 months after Butler. Trump's golfing, and there's somebody hiding in the golf or in the bushes, and the Secret Service actually spots him this time, shoots 5 times, misses all 5 times. He runs away, but is caught about 45 minutes later on the I-95. And it turns out, to your point, that he had been hiding at the golf course for almost 12 hours before this incident transpired. And the really weird thing that you're, I think, alluding to is the fact that Trump makes a last-minute decision to golf around 2 a.m., informs the Secret Service that, hey, I want to golf tomorrow morning. And that's actually within 30 minutes of when Ruth shows up to the golf course. Ruth had been camping at a nearby truck stop. And to me, this raises grave questions of whether there was some kind of security leak, because that's one hell of a coincidence where he just happens to show up right as Trump kind of makes the decision to golf. It boggles the mind.
The editor at HeadlineUSA.com, author of the Trump assassination plots, Ken Silva, talking about what the investigations missed and why it matters. Ken Silva, thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you very much.